Hello YouTube. Here in Sweden it is that time of year again. The days are getting shorter, the nights are getting colder, the rain is getting more. We call it autumn or fall. Well, actually in Sweden we call it höst, but still. And you kind of start looking forward to those long dark months of wet and cold winter that we have in my part of Sweden, where you can sit inside and play computer games and not feel bad about it because everyone else is sitting inside as well because it's cold and dark outside. Well, at least I'm looking forward to that. Some people prefer the sun and the beach and stuff. I don't. So it's also around this time every year that I start to get that itch. Maybe I should try to upgrade my computer just a tiny bit. I haven't actually touched my computer for a full year. Well, actually it's 370 days exactly today since I last upgraded my computer, which is very unusual. I built my first PC back in 1994 with the help of my brother. We built a system with a Intel 486 SX25 processor. That's 25 megahertz 486 without a math coprocessor, and I used OS2 Warp as my operating system. Great. And since then, none of my computers have lasted for more than 18 months, I think is the record, before I upgraded something. Usually it's between 8 and 12 months between upgrades, and usually I upgrade something like a new SSD or a new hard drive or a new graphics card, and then every now and then I throw away everything and I build a completely new system with the latest chipset. And it just so happens that a couple of weeks ago Intel released the new Skylake CPUs, which brings DDR4 memory to the table and some other good stuff. And the Core i7, the unlocked Core i7 CPU that you can actually buy now, is clocked at 4 gigahertz base clock. That is really cool. I never had a computer that fast, so I've been looking forward to upgrading to Skylake these past couple of weeks. And now I can actually buy this stuff here in Sweden. So I started looking at my options. Turns out, according to most benchmarks, it isn't really that much of an upgrade, which is a bit disappointing. It is kind of future proofing because it's newer stuff, but still, compared to the stuff I bought last year when I did my whole new computer thing, when I bought the Haswell Devil's Canyon Core i5 4690K CPU, 16 gigs of this Fury RAM, a nice box, and ASUS motherboard with Pro Deluxe with the built-in Wi-Fi, stuff like that. It turns out that if I spend the money to buy the Skylake system now, it wouldn't be much of an upgrade, which is a bummer. Another bummer is that if I try to upgrade my newly installed Windows 10 computer with a new motherboard, Windows will no longer recognize it as the same computer, which fair enough, that's how Microsoft had defined it. And although I did have a retail version of Windows 8, which I upgraded from, it turns out that I might not be able to convince the computer of that the windows of that when I upgrade the motherboard, because I have no product key for the upgrade. Some say that I could use my Windows 8 product key. Some say that I have to contact Microsoft to kind of convince them that it is the same computer. Well, it isn't. It's me, and I only have one computer, and I have a retail version of Windows 8, so I should be able to bring that retail version into a new system, a new build. That sounds like quite a lot of work. So in the end, the prospect of upgrading my current system to Skylake means that I have to buy a new motherboard, I have to buy new DDR4 RAM, I have to buy the CPU, and then I have to buy a cooling solution because I don't get a fan with the new Skylake CPUs. And then maybe I would have to buy a new retail version or OEM version of Windows 10, or do all the work to get it up and running again. So there will be no upgrade of my system this year, at least not with the Skylake CPU. So instead I started looking at upgrading the graphics card. I have a pretty old graphics card that I bought almost 2.5 years ago, and I bought it to be able to play Tomb Raider, because that's my favorite game. It's still a decent graphics card. It plays all the games I want to play pretty well, and I haven't really seen any reason to upgrade it, except that it makes quite a lot of noise, and I'm kind of allergic to noise. So maybe I could find a modern graphics card with the same kind of power, but say without a fan. It turns out that no, you really can't. A couple of years ago there was this whole market for taking whatever graphics card they had and making them fanless, but that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. I'm guessing that if I buy a pretty modest modern card, it would still make less noise because it would run cooler, and the fan didn't have to work so much. But still, do I really want to do that? And then when I was researching this and doing all these checks and trying to figure out what to do, I stumbled upon another CPU, and that was the Broadwell family of desktop CPUs. And you may not have heard of these because basically no one has. Broadwell was supposed to be last year's big release from Intel. It is the the Haswell was a 25 nanometer process. Broadwell was the 14 nanometer process of the Haswell chip, basically. So nothing new, but smaller, which means cooler and less power. And Broadwell kind of made an impact on the mobile laptop market late last year, but the desktop CPUs never showed up. And now, of course, the Intel have released Skylake, which is the same process, 14 nanometer, that Broadwell has, but they have these new instructions and stuff like the DDR4 and stuff like that. So when the Intel released the Broadwell CPUs in June, no one really cared, because it turns out that the upgrade from Haswell to Broadwell, as expected, didn't really give you much more computing power. And if you wanted to upgrade from something older than Haswell, say, I don't know, Sandy Bridge or Ivy Bridge, You would have to buy a new motherboard and new memory and all that kind of stuff that I would now have to buy to get the Skylake. And in June, if you wanted to buy a new motherboard and stuff, why not wait just a couple of months or so, because everyone knew that Skylake was coming back in June. So who really needs Broadwell? No one really needs Broadwell, it turns out, so it, no fanfare, nothing at all. But there are some sites that, even if no one is interested, they will still make reviews and benchmarks and stuff. And it turns out that the Broadwell did bring something interesting to the table, because the Broadwell had the Iris Pro 6200 graphics processor chipset thing on it, and that turns out to be pretty good. And in a lot of tests, benchmarks I saw, it was comparable to the kind of graphics card that I have in my system. So then came a question to my mind: could I put a Broadwell CPU in my system and ditch the graphics card altogether? No graphics card means a lot less heat, means less fan noise, and also the Broadwell CPU runs quite a lot cooler, about 30% cooler than the Haswell Devil Canyon. So less noise, same kind of performance, no graphics card. Would that be possible? I couldn't find any info on the internet about this. It happens sometimes that the internet fails me. It happens when I try to figure out if I could run my games on my Surface 3, and it happened again now. And I must admit that I have, it's kind of like a mental disorder thing, a deep personality flaw that has brought me to the brink of going broke and crazy a lot of times. And that is, I really have to know these things. If I have a question, I can't let it go until I've found an answer that I'm satisfied with. And sometimes that means spending weeks on the internet reading forums and watching YouTube and whatever. And sometimes you just have to get out and try things for yourself. And that's what I'm going to do now. So I have bought myself one of these. Yes, it is the Intel Core i5 processor 5675C. And you can't really see from the box, but this one does have a CPU cooler in it. And the big question is, it should be the same kind of performance as my old system, but without the graphics card. But is it? That's what we're going to find out today in my latest build with the Intel Core i5 5675C. Exciting. Alright, so before we can actually install the CPU in my computer, we need to unbox it. And, you know, it's always nice to have a quick unboxing on a Saturday. So here it is in all its glory. A lot of EN codes and stuff. The interesting thing with this CPU is, although it runs kind of slow, it also has 128 megabytes of, was it level 4 cache or something like that, which is kind of unique. No one else seems to have that. I don't know what that's going to do for the performance, but it's going to be interesting to find out. Okay, here we go. Oh, let's take it out. There we have the paperwork, installation instructions. I have a bunch of these. I don't know if I ever open it. CPU. I read somewhere that I have to upgrade the BIOS on my motherboard with this inside before it will actually run the Iris Pro chipset graphics. So I have to boot it up, upgrade the BIOS, then take it down again and remove the graphics card. So it's a bit of a process, but let's see what happens. So this is, here we go. And here we have the CPU. I'm not going to take it out of the box right now. That's really funny. I remember the old CPUs where, actually most of the stuff here was CPU. Now it's just pins, really. Oh well. I once bought a CPU where there was these lines on here that if you took a pen and just drew a line between two pins, you could unlock it for overclocking, which I did, which was fun. And here we have the bog standard Intel CPU cooler. So that's all that's in the box. Nothing in there, nothing in there. And here we have the stuff. And now I will start to dismantle my computer to install these and see what happens. All right. So it's been a while since I did this, obviously. 370 days to be precise. How do you get this out then? Come on. All right, so So this is the old CPU. The Haswell Core i5 Devil's Canyon 4690K. Alright, see if we can put that away somewhere. Now, as you can see, I'm not wearing my curly bracelet thing to prevent my CPU from dying, but I couldn't find it. But I did try to discharge myself beforehand. Hang on, that didn't sound right. Never mind. I you know what I mean. So here's the new CPU. Actually feels heavier, if that makes sense. Put that down there. Here we go. There we go. Then we have the cooler. It looks a lot like the old cooler actually, but it's not the same. 12 volts, 0.28 amps, and this is 0.17 amps. I have no idea what that means. I'm a software guy, but sounds like a difference. Here we go. All right. So that's in. That's connected. All right. I must say this is a lot easier than it was back in 1994. I can't say it was more fun back then, but at least it was very much more interesting. All right, let's boot this up, see if we can get it to run. Thank you very much. Alright, sit wrap. I'm done. I've installed the new CPU in my computer. It did take some time to get it right though, because I had to upgrade the BIOS before the internal integrated graphics would work. So I had to boot it up, install the new BIOS, downloading loads of files, update it, then reboot it so that the BIOS was all done. Then I could remove the graphics card and boot up, and it worked, kind of, although not entirely to my satisfaction. It turns out the Iris Pro 6200 graphics could not drive my big 27-inch QHD monitor and my not so big 1080p 24-inch monitor at the same time. It tried, but the 27-inch got all fuzzy, so I had to reduce it to 1080p on both screens, and that worked reasonably well, but you know, disappointment. I then proceeded to test benchmarks for the for Tomb Raider, obviously 1080p, and I can tell you that the Iris Pro 6200 chipset is no match for a discrete graphics card. At the 1080p resolution with ultra settings, I got maybe 20 frames per second, something like that. To make it playable, I had to reduce it to normal settings. Truth be told, I can't really see much difference between the ultra and the normal settings, but obviously great disappointment that I couldn't seem to be able to run it at the full resolution of the monitor. Also, I ran a couple of other benchmarks, and it was a lot worse. The performance was maybe 1/3 compared to the old setup when I ran the 3D Mark. So that was a disappointment for sure. It was a lot quieter though, really nice and quiet. And if I didn't have the discrete graphics card to start with, if I'd started with integrated graphics or come from a laptop or something, the Iris Pro 6200 graphics would probably have been enough for me. And also, if I had only one monitor, I would probably have been all right with integrated graphics. As it is though, I couldn't. I had to reinstall the graphics card and set it up again. And then I ran my benchmarks and everything again, and it turns out that my new system with the new CPU is actually slightly better than the old system. Not much, maybe 5%, 6%, something like that. Was it worth the money to upgrade? No, it wasn't. But at least now we know the Iris Pro cannot replace any even half decent graphic card. Even if it's 2.5 years old, it still can't be replaced by the Iris Pro. It's just not good enough to do that. And that's my mistake. I've made it. You don't have to. That's consumer advice for you. Also, it has to be said that I could probably have lived with the Iris Pro 6200 If I had just one monitor or two monitors with 1080p, both of them, playing Tomb Raider at normal settings at 1080p, that's not too bad actually. It looked pretty good, and I got 40 frames per second out of it. So that would be playable. I'm pretty sure that all my other games like Civilization and Diablo and StarCraft 2 would work just fine as well. And kind of goes to prove that the integrated graphics are coming along. They're not quite there yet in terms of quality and speed, but I have a feeling that within a couple of years, for someone like me who don't really play the latest Battlefield or that kind of game, the integrated graphics would be good enough, really. If you go back just a generation of the integrated graphics, they were really bad. Now the Iris Pro would have been playable to me. If I go another generation or two down the line, I think that the integrated graphics would definitely be an alternative for someone like me. And it's getting harder to motivate the really high prices of the discrete graphics card, because they are getting quite expensive, and it's hard to see why you need a setup where you can play games at dual 4K monitors with ultra high settings. So this one, Intel i5 5675C Broadwell. Should you buy it? Well, no, you shouldn't. You really shouldn't. All the stuff that everyone said online is absolutely true. If you have a Haswell system, this upgrade will be minimal at best. If you don't have a Haswell system, then you might as well just skip this generation and move directly to Skylake, which would be a giant leap for you, I think. And also, unless you come from a laptop world, you do really need a discrete graphic card. So that's lessons learned. Also, it's worth noting that the graphics cards of today are possibly more expensive than they really need to be. So I can't really see the point in shelling out 700 euros on a new graphics card when the one I have, 2.5 years old, actually runs just fine. Might be that there are new DirectX things going on that could be worth it, but just the sheer power, no. When I can get that kind of power from a graphics card without a fan, that's when I'm gonna buy a new graphics card. But I suspect that the integrated graphics will actually catch up before that happens. So there you have it. That's my experiment with replacing a discrete graphics card with the Broadwell Iris Pro 6200 graphics chipset, which failed. So don't try this at home, kids.